Good evening and welcome to this presentation related to COP26. This is part of a small contribution to a larger discussion that all of the teaching profession will be having, not just up until COP26, but I'm sure for years to come. The session's been convened, I guess, by the GA's Sustainability and Citizenship Special Interest Group. And we have a range of speakers this evening who are going to add a contribution about the work that they're doing and hopefully give you a range of resources, ideas, provocations, sort of thoughts to take forward into your own classrooms. We have representatives from the teaching profession. We have those at primary, at secondary and higher education. And we also have some colleagues who are related to education but are not actually in the classroom at the moment. So we've got a range of voices. Now, we understand that there are people who are going to be preparing students for COP26 type lessons. There are going to be resources being produced. There are going to be, I'm sure, guest speakers into schools, assemblies, those sorts of additional elements to what students are going to be presented with in their geography lessons. And so what we're going to do is take you through some ideas, essentially. Thank you very much for joining us. It's the end of the second day for many of us, of a very busy start to term. And of course, we're getting used to being surrounded by people again. And all those young people obviously have a curiosity and imagination, which we want to harness, and also a lot of energy. And so several of our speakers are going to talk about agency, about allowing students to feel that they are part of a solution, that actually their generation may be the generation, obviously, that's going to live perhaps with the consequences of climate emergency, but also perhaps to be equipped with the knowledge and the skills and the ideas to do something about it. Now, our speakers are going to also have different perspectives from the personal, but also extending out to the global. Each presenter is going to have an allocation of time. We may or may not stick to the timings, and we may in fact finish early and we can go and have our tea a little bit early. But I'm going to start in a few moments by talking about some of the work that I've been doing about building climate change narratives. And then we have Radhika and Michaela, who are going to talk about their work in running a school COP26 Climate Conference. We have Kit Rackley, and they're going to talk about anxiety, acknowledgement, and agency in the classroom. Sue Lomas is going to talk about the GA's worldwide pledges, which are being collected ahead of COP26. And to finish, Paula Owens is going to talk about empowering children in times of change. So hopefully there's going to be something for everybody. So enjoy. And I'm going to now just share some of my slides. So just bear with me for 1 second. Okay, so hopefully you're able to see the presentation there. I'm going to just make it full screen. I think that's sharing. I'm just going to double check on the stream. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so many of you, I hope, will be familiar with the climate change stripes. In fact, I'm wearing my climate change stripes tie today. In fact, it was school photographs today, so this will be immortalized in my school photo on my badge for the next year as well. Now, obviously, the stripes produced by Ed Hawkins, University of Reading, they tell a story. They tell a story of the last century for this particular set of stripes, because this is the UK stripes. Now, each country, you can identify and download the relevant stripes from showyourstripes.info. So the stripes are available, and they can form part of a discussion. As the blues change to reds, you can see a change in the sorts of temperatures that are being experienced around the world. Now, that change has been happening, well, for hundreds of years, certainly since humans began to burn fossil fuels on such a large scale as we have been. Now, clearly, there have been natural fluctuations in the climate. And if you're teaching GCSE and A-level, you'll be familiar with the way that you are perhaps teaching about those natural changes. But what we're talking about here are the anthropogenic changes, the forcings, the human element to climate change. Now, I started teaching in 1986, 35 years ago. I stepped into a classroom for the first time. And even back then, the geography curriculum included aspects of climate change. Back then, it was referred to as global warming, and it was also part of a wider environmental set of themes, which included acid rain. Acid rain doesn't seem to be talked about quite so much now, although I'm sure that there are still areas of the world affected by it. Soon into my teaching career, we had the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, and I remember many mini Earth Summits at the time. So the work that we're going to hear about the school COP26 Climate Conference is something which has been done before, in a sense, in many schools. Some people may remember the resources that were put out around the Earth Summit for Rio de Janeiro. And of course, back then we had young people sharing their voices. Decades before Greta Thunberg, we had young people sharing their concerns about the future planet. But 1992, still, but even then we had different voices, opposing voices. Now, what we've seen is a slow shift to the narrative around climate change. And one particular stepping stone in that journey was the release of this film, An Inconvenient Truth, in 2006. And I remember when this film was released, and the plan was to provide a copy for all schools, the idea being that this was so important that all schools should be introduced to it, all students should be introduced to it. Now, when this plan was announced, this gentleman here took offence to that, and he actually took the Secretary of State for Education to court. And what he wanted to do was to try and prevent the film from being shown in schools. Now, when the judge gave down their verdict at the end of the hearing, well, you can see what the judge said here. He talked about the fact that the film was promoting partisan political views, and that teachers would have to inform pupils that there were other opinions on global warming. And I remember at the time that as teachers, we received guidance that if we were to show the film, we also had to show some of the opposing views. Now, I'll return to that idea a little bit later. But obviously, we have 15 years ago now, this continuation of the fact that climate change was still up for debate. That by talking about climate change, you might in some way be partisan in your views. Now, in 2012, we had Rio plus 20 again. In 2012, I remember many schools running mini Rio conferences. And at the time, we also had the GA, through Graham Butt and David Napper, beginning to share global warming games and other activities, whether we might want to think about the way in which a game might be used to tell the story of climate change. Is that the right approach? Again, maybe some of you have ideas for this. Maybe some of you already use that notion of gamification within your curriculum. And obviously, there are a number of commercial games which the action plays out against a backdrop of a changing climate or a changing world. Now, if we bring it forward to the present year, this is Lytton in British Columbia. And this was at the start of the summer holiday. And this was really the beginning of a whole range of events which seemed to be showing a sort of an acceleration almost of extreme weather events. We had extreme heat, which was followed by wildfires, and the town of Lytton was essentially razed to the ground by the fires which followed the extreme heat, which was record-breaking heat. We've also seen dramatic rainfall. Even today in France, right now, there's tremendous flooding in parts of France following extreme rainfall. And I was reading about the Washington Post today, talking about how flooding is likely to become more extreme in the future, but more moderate flooding is likely to become less common. So in other words, things are going to be amplified by climate change. Now, when this story came out, this was the Times editorial, and they, not necessarily for the first time, but they certainly began to share this view about things needing to adapt. Devastation in Germany, the wildfires, all of this was part of an increasing trend. Now, some of our presenters today are going to talk about this idea of anxiety, and certainly this would have provoked for many an anxiety about whether these sorts of events were going to become a much bigger part of our daily existence and how that might affect our daily lives. Now, this also leads into this notion of data. We're often presenting students with data, but I think it's very important that we try and turn that data into stories. And I like this quote from Benjamin Zephaniah. This was at this year's Hay Festival, where he was talking about a book he'd written about the Windrush child. And although it's a fictional, as he says here, I prefer my fiction to be true. So when we're talking about climate change, when we talk about stories of climate change, we need to bear in mind that we are talking about perhaps individuals or places, and trying to personalize those. And we're trying to actually shift away from data into stories. And of course, the classic storytellers, the Hans Roslings, David Attenboroughs, they are excellent at weaving stories. Another option, of course, is to develop this notion of climate literacy, which allows individuals to become active participants, to understand and be able to explain information, perhaps in the form of a podcast. And there are some podcasts that you might get students to listen to. So this one here with Mark Watson and Matt Winning is worth a look at, and maybe students themselves could create podcasts. Ian Stewart has produced an excellent film which talks about the how we know that climate change is happening, and that might be worth introducing to students. I'm going to do that. And we also have, of course, the climate stripes, and I have these shown very large on my classroom wall. And I've used a website called Raster Beta. And what Raster Beta does is it takes any image and enlarges it. So I have the massive climate stripes in the classroom, and we can talk about that progression. And it's a constant in the room. As students walk in, it's visible there, and we can have some discussions around it. And by reading the stories, you're also improving your vocabulary around climate change. So I love this word, which means indisputable. And we're starting now, I would say, to see indisputable evidence of climate change. So we need to introduce students then to a vocabulary, to structures, to shape that vocabulary. And as David Lambert says here, we need really to enhance children and young people's capabilities. So this is part of the work of capabilities, to actually enable students to see how they can turn their knowledge into action. So this is a recent article written by David, which is well worth a look at. Now, I mentioned the change in narrative earlier, and BBC Bite Size is used by many students, and you may remember this story where the positive impacts of a warmer global climate were added to a Bite Size page, but fairly quickly removed from the page, and also from an SQA geography course. So that potentially is an area which you might use for debate with students. Are there really any positives of climate change? And these conversations can also connect with other parts of the geography curriculum. So, for example, historically, we've always talked about the Holderness Coast as an area of coastal erosion. So here's a classic area of the Holderness Coast. This is Withensea. But as this article in The Conversation says, students can use storytelling to bring the dangers of climate change to life. And there is actually a resource which has been put together by the University of Hull, along with students of Withensea High School, which explores this notion of security of coastal change. Now, another master storyteller is David Attenborough. We've got a link here to a 60 minutes interview. And all of this material, by the way, is going to be on the Living Geography blog afterwards. So there's almost too much, of course. What I would suggest you do is focus in on one particular story, one particular focus for your storytelling, one particular media for telling that story. That could be writing the script for a podcast. It could be giving a set of images or curating a set of images and adding some text to that. And you might be influenced by the work of other educators. Paul Turner's Climate Breakdown Scheme has key texts. David Alcock's Hopeful Geographies uses the work of Rutger Bregman. The National Geographic magazine, a recent issue, talked about urban inequalities and environmental racism in cities as a result of the tree cover. And to return back to Lytton, we have this change then, this change in the narrative around climate change, which I would say has happened and accelerated during the summer. So do your readings, Rebecca Solnit, and young people's voices in the Serpentine galleries. Introduce students to different people talking about climate change, developing their vocabulary, and in that way, the young people that you're teaching will be presented with a positive future, rather than this stunning cartoon that Ben Jennings had published in The Guardian on Results Day. We really need to change to some more positive narratives, and this is something which our next speakers are going to talk about. I'm going to add now Radhika and Michaela to the stream.
Hi.
Hi Radhika, Michaela, I can hear you. And Michaela?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
I can, yes. I'm going to mute my microphone now, and if you want to share your slides, we are ready to listen to you.
Can you see that okay? That's fine, Radhika, I can see that, yes.
Okay, perfect. Hi, so my name's Radhika Chandrasingh. I work for Harris Federation as one of the geography consultants. And Michaela, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Michaela Critchley. I work for a charity called Interclimate Network, and I'm the programme manager.
So we were really keen for our students to engage with COP26, and we got in touch with Michaela at the Interclimate Network, and she supported us with running our conference in school. So she provided us with some really fantastic resources, which we used as a starting point to help us run our conference. You'll find that online there's a range of resources that are available, and we used, which are suited to both primary and secondary. We used the resources provided by the Interclimate Network, which consisted of 3 PowerPoints. The first to take you through climate change and a bit about the geography of it, and also what COP26 is and why it's so important. And then the final PowerPoint actually takes you through a step-by-step process to running the conference, where students get an opportunity to pitch their speeches, take part in voting, and also negotiating with other countries as well. There's a range of handouts that are available, which again tell you the background on climate change as well as COP26, and also include country briefings where you have information on how climate change impacts that country, a bit about the country profile and what they're doing as part of their climate pledge. We ran our conference as a cross-federation conference and involved 17 of our Harris Academies, and we pitched it to our Year 9 students. However, it can be done as an individual class, or you can do it as a range of different classes across a year group or even across the school. There's 19 country briefings available, and these are split into 4 categories. So you have the climate vulnerable category, the political groups, the industrial nations, and the emerging economies. It's likely that you won't be able to use all 19 country briefings, but we would recommend getting a mix of the 4 different categories. I would also recommend having between 4 to 6 students per group. This allows for the students to really get involved and allows each student to have something to say as the conference begins. If you can, try to link it to a teaching topic. We actually linked it to one of our topics which debates climate change as as Earth's biggest challenge. If not, it can be used as an additional sessions as a little add-on topic once you've finished your previous one, or you can have it as you can run it as part of an enrichment club. On the right there, I've got a suggested timetable which you could use. We sent this to all of our academies as part of the conference that we ran. So the first few sessions just take you through what the climate crisis is, a bit about COP26, and then gives them time to prepare for the actual conference. And then after the conference, there's some additional optional follow-up sessions where they can look at what action they can take in school. So top tips for running the conference. As I said, there's a range of different resources that are available online. We found that some of the language in the resources that we used, our students weren't quite familiar with, so we did change some of that. So do have a look through them and just see if they're suited to your curriculum or for your students. It's a good idea to assign a teacher to each of your groups, or even a sixth former. This helps them just to talk their ideas through, practice their speeches on them, and also just for any kind of additional support. If you can, it's a really ideal opportunity to get trainee teachers involved or early career teachers, and it adds evidence for their folders. Or for the sixth formers, they can use it as part of their UCAS or for their CVs as well. Try and create a buzz around the event. We actually, once each of our academies were assigned a country, we sent them a package which included the country flags that they were representing, table stands. We got stickers for our students to wear during the conference. We posted out geography badges, pencils, and certificates, all sorts. And also, it's a really good opportunity to sort of put it on your school social media as well. So you can see the we ran our conference virtually, so you can see just the image on the bottom right where we managed to get some pictures of the schools that took part in this event. If you can, also try and get a climate champion to talk about some local action that they can do in their school or in their local area. This could be someone who's really passionate about climate change within your school. That might not necessarily be a geographer, or it could be the local MP or a member of the SLT team, and they can talk to your students about what they can do within the school. We found that the conference really developed a lot of skills for our students. It developed their oracy, it really promotes literacy. They got a lot of confidence from it as well. So it's a really fantastic opportunity to develop those skills. And also it does really promote the subject as well. We found that it raised the profile of our subject, and we ran the conference just before we broke up for the summer, and actually had some of our Year 9 students changing their GCSE options from history to geography, which is a big win for us. If you do decide to run the conference virtually, then I would just recommend testing your cameras and microphones beforehand. If possible, have a separate mic. That just gives better sound quality. You can use the chat function for voting, so they can like the different voting options, which we found was quite efficient, and also have an additional member of staff for tech support, and they can just mute or spotlight groups, and again it just makes the session run a bit smoother.
I'm just going to come in with some overall comments. Thanks, Radhika. And with Interclimate Network, we've been running model climate conferences for over a decade. And just echoing what Alan says is this feeling of longevity of these discussions. So we were actually started with Copenhagen, which was billed as a COP to end all COPs. And here we are in many, many years later on, still involved. What we've found is that the COP process, the United Nations sort of mini COP process, really brings to life critical thinking about the global climate emergency, we've called it here, but the climate crisis, in that the young people really have to get to understand the depths of a country and to put forward those views. So we've got the country's representatives that are actually are going to be playing big parts in COP26 in one way or another. So across your conference, you will get that breadth of understanding, but also perspectives, particularly thinking about young people's views. So there are links to different films and to different resources looking at young people's stories from around the world, again echoing what Alan said earlier, and also the position of vulnerable nations in particular. So that's a real sort of emphasis for us in our resources. But then it's looking at how that fits within your priorities. So Radhika explained that actually the resources are very open source. Just go in there, take them and use them how you will. You don't even have to run the full 3 sessions. You can run it with an eco group. You can do it however you like. There is a teacher resource guide, which is sort of step by step, and guidance notes in the presentations for how to deliver a conference in a classroom. So we hope that it's very accessible. We do have sort of support offered, but we're a very small charity. We do have some support in terms of, I'll show you next slide, but we're going to run a training session if you want to hold a COP in your classroom. So we'll be looking at running a session to look in more depth, to give you confidence really about facilitating in the classroom your own COP. And I think the last thing to say is that really to echo that knowledge is one thing, but action is the end result. So what we're really keen from an Interclimate Network is to put forward the ways that young people can take heart from advocacy and from action. So in the build up to COP26, we're going to be working with partners to gather information back from students and their views in order to put to a youth event in COP26 itself. So we're looking at all sorts of opportunities and promoting ways that young people can feel like they've got something important to share, and that there is a route for them to share that. So the last slide really is a summary of what we've just said. So Interclimate Network has contact details, and if you're interested in conference facilitation, the workshop I've just mentioned, there's an email address there. We've also highlighted, Radhika, you've highlighted 2 sets of resources there. So one is the climate conference in the classroom, that's Interclimate Network. Do you want me to say also about the Together for Our Planet? Shall I talk about that?
Absolutely.
So there's a very, very big set of resources that's gone up on that website there on Twinkle, which has got many, many resources for you to look at, primary and secondary. And so there's lots and lots to get involved with there as well. Last thing to say about this, this set of information has come through the network of development education centres. So there are other opportunities there under training that are linked to local development education centres that might be in an area close to you. I think that's it. Are we in time, Alan?
Thank you very much indeed. That was excellent, and it actually fits quite nicely with Kit's session 2. So Kit is up next. I will just add the presentation slides. And would you like to introduce yourself, Kit? Just turn your microphone on, Kit.
I'm usually pretty good at that. Thanks, Alan. So my name's Kit. My pronouns are they, them, and I used to be a geography high school teacher for 13 years, but I've since been working with climate scientists in scientific communication, and I'll spare all the details. But one of the projects I've been working on quite intently very recently is with regards to climate anxiety, eco-anxiety, and climate change as a safeguarding issue. So I will cover all that here. You'll see there's a bit.ly link there that will appear on most slides, so don't scribble it down now if you're not able to get up now. But I've put all the resources on there, so please, if you can, pens and pencils down unless there's something you really want to scribble down, because I've stuck everything in there for you. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the preamble because I know you're quite keen for me to get onto like the practical side of things. But I think we've all now heard of terms like eco-anxiety, climate anxiety, and I'd just refer you to the absolute amazing, wonderful Clover Hogan with regards to this, especially her recent TED Talk. So you just search for it on TED, which is What to Do When Climate Change Feels Unstoppable. And that's, if you want a preamble on eco-anxiety, just watch that. It's one of the best things you'll listen to. But we define climate anxiety, or Clover does, is feelings of stress, overwhelm, fear, grief towards the climate and ecological crisis. And so what we've got to try and do as teachers and educators and scientific communicators is we've got to try, and the first step is to get youngsters and people working with youngsters acknowledging that this is a normal human reaction. So, you know, we are historically connected to the earth, you know, the way our human culture first started, the way we used to use the land sustainably, work with the land, have a symbiotic relationship with the land. Alan mentioned Hans Rosling earlier, you know, we used to die in ecological nature balance with nature simply because that was the way of things. And but since we've disconnected ourselves from nature, you know, this is our anxiety and our mental health has really, really suffered. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we're very, very clear with our students to say, look, this is a normal human reaction that you're feeling and you are not to be ashamed about it. So the first thing is acknowledgement about our anxiety. If you want to have a look at all the facts and figures behind this, I won't go through it now, but there's a few reports that you can read if you so wish. But the one that Clover and Force of Nature led with in partnership with Caroline Hickman, for example, says this. And one of the key headline things is, you know, 70% of participants in this eco-anxiety study felt a feeling of hopelessness when they thought about climate change. And there's some other statistics there which you can have a look at, and they don't look for very, very good reading, unfortunately. But as I say, all the links to all these kind of stuff are referenced in the bit.ly link that I've given you. And I mentioned Caroline Hickman, who's a climate psychologist and does a lot of work on this. And one of the most shocking statistics here is, you know, about, I think it's 40 to 45% of young people who suffer a traumatic event, you know, which is in the mental health guidance, statutory guidance from the government that we've got to look at as educators, underneath risk factors, disasters, accidents, war, or other overwhelming events, which you can put the climate crisis in. You know, a big significant proportion of our young people suffer long-term mental health issues as a result of these. So we must be treating this issue as a safeguarding issue, which I'll come to back a bit later. And again, that's another thing that you can look at there. So what do we therefore do about this? Okay, so how can we go from all these feelings of fear, anxiety, hopelessness to the bit, you know, where we're paralyzed, and as a human race, we're, you know, this is the kind of bit we're stuck in at the moment, the reason why we're in 2021 and we haven't really moved forward very much. So how do we remove these barriers? How do we do this? How do we change this into where it's still in the background, but we're now supporting our students? What are the practical ideas that we can do? For me personally, as I've already mentioned, we need to start making structural and cultural change. I think, you know, the last talk with Michaela and Radhika, fantastic ideas, brilliant ideas, definitely do those ones. But why is it that we seem to do these amazing things where these talented people come up with these great ideas and then they seem to peter out, or they're used in a tokenistic kind of way, or they are done in an activities week and then they're never seen again until the next year, and then another year's worth of, you know, climate change has happened. So we've got to have some kind of structural and cultural change. And this is why I've been working on this quite heavily. So I'll say at the start, if there's any out you working in organisations, educational unions, any policymakers whatsoever, I need you to get in contact with me so I can help you and you can help me and you can help the education system to make this happen, please. And that is using COP26, for example, as a catalyst for structural and cultural change by making climate change a safeguarding issue in your school. Because as soon as it's made a safeguarding issue in your school, your SLT have got to pay attention. So that mock COP that you run, that was so lovely presented in the last session, that doesn't just become a one-off thing, that becomes a necessary thing. And then the outcomes will be evaluated on how it had improved protective factors when it comes to safeguarding and reduced risk factors when it comes to safeguarding. Now, I've got loads of stuff that you can use for background reading on this. I'm happy to give talks about this, speak to members of SLT. And so that's one thing that we can do, is we can make this structural change. And okay, so what about the students themselves? How are we going to try and translate this anxiety, acknowledgement about the anxiety, and then move it into agency and empower? You're all doing a fabulous, fantastic job anyway, right? So all I think it is for us to do is to change the narrative slightly. is just think about the way we present, think about the way we come across, think about how we portray it. And Alan nailed it with the last slide of his presentation. How are we going to stop those Ben Jennings cartoons, as amazing as they are, being what's in our students' head, and try thinking of our kids having a brighter future? And it's all about capability and what you can do. So what can they do, not what should they do? I've been guilty of this as well, where, you know, you do those wonderful lessons about the things you can do to be more environmentally friendly. You know, go home, do some recycling, turn off the light, speak to... That sounds all great, doesn't it? But think about how you're portraying that message. You know, you should do this. If you don't, you're a bad person. That's how it's coming across to some student, and it's feeding into that anxiety, even though that is not our intention. So one thing that you can do, and this resource is in the Google Drive that I made, is think about this. Next time you do an activity about what we can do about climate change, get students to evaluate their capability as well as their desire to do something. And then get them to discuss in a safe classroom environment to the extent that they would like to give something a go, but they can't give something a go, and allow them to make the choice whether they disclose that or whether they just think about it or whether they share that. And of course, we're all responsible for making a safe classroom environment, right? Okay. And then of course, this thing's got about owning anxiety. Okay, we're almost there at the end. Can you just give me a time check in the chat, Alan? Another thing that we're going to be looking at is University of East Anglia Project Change, which I'm the education consultant for. Thanks, Alan. So go to projectchange.uea.ac.uk. We're running a climate anxiety workshop. It's online for anybody around the country, or if you're based in East Anglia, we could potentially do it in person. And it's all about trying to reconnect our students' minds and bodies back to the environment and acknowledging their anxiety, and then how we can turn it into agency. There's loads of stuff like this going on, and there's other climate change workshops for you to take a look at in there. And then finally, and it's already been said, the last two presentations, celebrate achievements no matter how small, right? No matter how small. If a student comes in and they're quite bouncing about, oh, you know, we had a vegan meal last week. It was only one. I was like, wow, that's amazing. What did you eat? Are you going to have a go at it next week? Are you going to try and go 2 days a week? No, we're only going to go 1 day a week for now and see how it goes. Oh, but that's brilliant. Yeah, just really big all those small wins up, and things like that. And some of you might remember the Youth Climate Summit from last November. I put together a poem from young people's efforts. They made the substance and the stories of the poem that I formulate together. So have a look at that Why Not Now poem, get some inspiration, show it to your students, and then see what stories they come out, see what they can be empowered by their own students. Okay. So that's me. Thanks everybody for listening, and please don't forget, I am always happy to talk to people, to advise or whatnot. Just get in contact with me. Thanks, Alan.
Kit, thank you very much. Fantastic. Now, some of the small actions you may be able to take are going to be explained to us now by Sue Lomas. Now, Sue, if you are able to share your slides by clicking the little share button at the bottom.
I get a choice, Alan.
Yep. So I would go for the screen.
Right. Okay.
And I'll put that up when it appears.
Where's my other? Oh, right. Okay. I can't find it though when I do that.
Okay. Is it in a window? Is it a part of a tab?
It's open. Wait a minute.
Or alternatively, you can talk to your slides and we can imagine how beautiful they are.
Yeah, they are beautiful. Just hold on a moment. Why can't I?
Try to drop in and see what appears.
Okay. Apologies, guys.
No problem at all.
I don't know why it won't come up with any other pictures but the screen I'm looking at you on and saying hello. How weird, how weird, how weird. Hold on. Give me one more second and then I'll just do the talking.
Yes, I'm sure that'll be fine. I can put up perhaps the GA website while you're doing that as well.
Oh, that would be good.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to start there, and I'll put the website up once.
Okay, so I'm Sue Lomas. I'm the co-chair of the Worldwise board. We are now actually, and that's the arm of the Geographical Association that specifically works directly with students. So we try to put up activities through our Worldwise Week and through our Worldwise activities that directly involve children in geography. So I'm sure probably one of the things that you're most perhaps knowledgeable about is the Worldwise quiz, which we have been doing now for a very long time. It used to be a face-to-face quiz. I think lots of us are now doing it online, and we're certainly going to try and find an electronic way to do it next time. I've sent you some slides, Alan, if they arrive, perhaps you can put them up. Okay, so at Education Group, which is where all the committee chairs get together to talk about, the ways forward for geography and the Geographical Association and schools, we had a long talk about how we could actually make a difference with COP26. And one of the things we decided we thought we might be able to do was to put up some pledges and call for pledges. So ties in really nicely actually with what Kit was talking about. It's really important that kids see that children see the small ways in which they can make a difference when this huge thing is looming over them. What are the small things that can make a difference? And I think we had a lot of ideas about how those have you found them? How those pledges might be put together, and I had some examples on some slides. But we've also thought about, well, it's not just about saying I'll pick up litter or I will do something else. We really wanted you to persuade kids to actually do their make an investigation into what they were doing, and make sure that they understood why the little things that they were doing were able to make a difference. So King Alfred's School in Burnham-on-Sea have done this before. They painted their pledges on tiles, and then they made, actually in the end, they made a whole mosaic floor with tiles. If you can move it up a bit, Alan, you'll see that other ways to do it were trees. I think these two trees are fantastic actually, because one pledge on a little leaf doesn't look very much, but when you display it as a tree like that, you can see that everybody working together can actually make a difference. I think it's also a real opportunity to get into entrance halls. Not just the art department can do displays, but this is an opportunity to do it. On a parents' evening, you could ask parents to make their pledges when they come, and so on. So those are some of the ways in which we would really like you to work with your students to provide some pledges that we could display on the website, and certainly share with the COP26 teams and people working. We've got other things on the Worldwise Week resources. There are quite a few activities on there that would help to explain some of the climate change the climate change work. We've certainly got other, the other thing is it's not just about carbon, is it? So there's all sorts of other organisations. So the Ninja Gardener, if you know the Garden Ninja for United Utilities, about saving water. There's another one that says there's no planet B. What can we do to make our lives sustainable? There's a lot of resources around from which children could identify those pledges that they wanted to make, and then you could. So, for example, what is really the advantage of having a metal straw to a paper straw? Why is that more sustainable? So actually doing the work behind, not just, I had a lovely set of year 2 handprints with their pledges on, and then the teacher had made a display where they put the handprints all around a map of the world, and Ronnie said, I pledge to keep my bedroom clean and tidy, and so that the world doesn't get dirtier. It's a big step, that. So it's about helping them see how the things that they do actually will impact on the world, if you like, and how they actually can make a difference. I think that's what we were trying to get to, that if you can decide on a pledge, carry out a geography investigation maybe into that pledge individually or as a class or as a group, and then send those photos of your pledges to the GA, so that we can display them, hopefully, all over COP26 week. It would be really fantastic to have classes, schools, parents, pledges all across the website during the week of COP26. Sorry about the slides. I had some really good pictures as well. Never mind. But we're always available if you want to get in touch with us. We're always looking for new members on Worldwise Committee, I might say, whilst I'm here, Alan. So if anybody wants to join us to develop more activities for young people, then please get in touch through the Geographical Association. Thanks very much, Alan.
Thank you very much, Sue. And it would be great to get some pledges. And I know that my Vice Principal has already been in touch about actions that we can take within the school, and that's certainly one of the things that I shall be doing. Now, we're going to finish with Paula Owens, who's going to share some ideas for empowering children in times of change. Are you able to share your slides, Paula, or do you want me to?
Hello, Alan. I think I'm going to be okay, hopefully.
Okay.
Is that okay for everyone?
That looks fine to me, yes.
Yeah, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me along, and thank you very much to the other presenters. It's been totally fascinating to hear all the different approaches this afternoon. And I'm going to finish up with talking about experiences from a primary perspective, and particularly about how we can empower children in times of climate crisis. Now, I remember being back in a classroom in 1996-7, and we felt really chuffed with ourselves because we just adopted a whole school policy for sustainability, which was quite radical at the time. And I think here we are kind of more than 20 years later, and we're still banging the same drum. But as Alan says, it's an ever more urgent situation. And it is time to really think about what action we can take and how we can empower children to take that action. And at that time, we were trying to build hope for children so that they could see there was hope in the future. But I think hope is not enough anymore. We need to think about empowering as well. So thinking about the word empowering, how can we empower children and teachers? Well, the word empowerment actually means authority or power, that we allow someone to do something. And it's particularly about attitudes and values, knowledge, critical thinking and agency in this context. And that's what I'm going to talk about, and about some whole school issues for curriculum thinking, along with some ideas of putting it into practice. So here's a copy of Primary Geography that came out at the beginning of this year, with a whole focus on empowering geography. And if you're a member, you can download all of that from the GA website. And from our editorial, I was lucky enough to edit it with Sharon Witt and Tessa Willey. We noticed that actually we can empower teachers as well. And as teachers, we can feel empowered when we take that curriculum and do some curriculum making to decide how we're going to populate it with the kind of content that we need for our pupils. And that's especially important for primary teachers, because I think in primary we feel that we perhaps haven't got permission to teach about climate change, and we absolutely have. In fact, I would say you can't do excellent geography without teaching about climate change, because they're so entwined. And when we empower children, we also kind of make them feel more hopeful, because, as Alexander noted, pessimism turns to hope when witnesses felt they had the power to act. When children feel they're capable of doing something, they feel a lot more hopeful about what they can do. So a quick model of environmental literacy, because this is going to guide us through how we can approach our curriculum. And we've got these three elements: a functional element, cultural and critical. Now, Andy Stables coined this kind of environmental literacy framework. And he said, first of all, we've got this core knowledge aspect, this functional knowledge. And if you like, that's the basic national curriculum. There are facts that we need to teach children. There's the vocabulary that is quite vast for geography, and particularly important for climate change as well, and the typologies and the categories. But we also need to go further than that, because we need to think about cultural aspects. And those cultural aspects mean that we need to think about other people's points of view, which is particularly relevant for geography, because geography goes beyond core facts. People's feelings and opinions and values about places shape how they act in and towards places, and ultimately how they affect and can change those places. So it's a very important aspect of geography. So we'll be looking at some ideas for developing that. And then finally, this critical aspect, when children feel empowered through having the knowledge and the vocabulary to be part of the discourse, to have the awareness of other people's input and influence and opinions, and they feel in a place to make this informed decisions. So language really does matter. And this is a key kind of takeaway for me when I was teaching in schools, certainly. And there is so much language about climate change, and it's really confusing. So a top tip, if you like, for me in schools is to think about that language that you're going to use with your year group. Think about the language that you will use, and think about a glossary that you can work out with children, and how you will describe it, and how you will all be singing from the same page, if you like, throughout the school, and adopt that phraseology. Now, I've highlighted climate crisis here because I think there are so many phrases that we can use to talk about the current climate crisis. Some of us say climate change, climate crisis, climate emergency, and they're interchangeable in a sense, but it's quite helpful if we adopt one and talk about what it actually means. I like crisis. I like the term crisis, not because it's, I like the term crisis because it indicates a turning point, a decision making, and it comes from the Greek word meaning to distinguish, choose, or decide. I think emergency can sound quite frightening, and all of it is frightening for young children, but crisis is a word that allows them to think, well, we're at a really important turning point, and we do have some power in making some decisions about how we live our lives, and calling on others, on the grown-ups in the equation, to think about the decisions that they're making too. So think carefully about the decisions and the language that you'll be using. And I've put some links down here to some glossaries from the IPCC report, from the Guardian website, from the Met Office. And the Met Office one is particularly helpful, I think, for primary schools. But how do we talk about nature as well? Because nature is part of the equation with the biodiversity crisis. And the Discupta report that came out earlier this year just noted how important nature is for us, and how important it is to stop and notice the nature around us, and to feel that we are part of it rather than apart from it. If you couple that with the findings from various surveys about how children have been losing the language to talk about nature, and certainly Rod McFarlane and the Lost Words emphasised the importance of bringing back that everyday language to talk about the world around us. So how can we develop that? Well, two important ways we can do that in primary. First of all, we can get outside. We can do geography fieldwork. We can get children in touch with their environment. But also we can use simple techniques like haiku to develop that vocabulary, to stop, slow down and notice the world around us. And then what do we mean by sustainability? Well, quite often this phrase causes people to kind of think, go off to sleep maybe, and just zoom out of it and just not be really sure what it's all about. But I think it's important with children to talk about sustainability and again, develop some language that they can understand, develop a meaning for them. So I'm going to go right back now to the Holland report, to the three-legged stool, in which it was all about society, environment and economy, although a fourth leg has now been added, culture. But I think the three-legged stool for children is particularly relevant. It's about language of people, places and jobs in its most basic form, and getting them to think about the well-being of places. How can we keep ourselves healthy, the planet healthy, and how can we ensure that people have a sustainable living? But all of these different interpretations of sustainability, they're all about futures. There's a very strong futures aspect. And Dave Hicks puts this very nicely into this little diagram here, in which he says there are probable futures, possible futures, and preferred futures. And actually that future hasn't been made yet. So when children think that they might have a say in what actually happens, that there are decisions still to be made, and that there are decisions for grown-ups to be made too, then we can ask, well, what do we think will happen? What do we want to happen? And what can we do to make a difference? And again, it builds that hope in, and in building that hope in through empowering children to realise that they can still make a difference. So how do we build in other points of view? Well, luckily I saw this on Twitter and I absolutely loved it, from All Saints Primary School in Gresford. Thinking about other people's point of view when we engage with issues, which is a really important part of geography. And here we've got the issues of a new housing development, thinking about it from different people's perspectives, a building supplier, a local child, the homeowner and the dog walker, the local cafe owner, the head teacher, and the local bird watcher, all with these different ideas. And that gets children to think about different perspectives and how they can often clash over how places are used. And it's really important for this aspect of information to be debated by pupils and to build this critical thinking in. But it's not just about people's point of view, it's about all living things. So for example, when I was working in primary schools and we had a wind turbine being installed, so we built that into our curriculum, and it's a really important thing to think about how you can build practical actions you're taking into your own curriculum. And so we thought about the wind turbine and how it might be viewed by not only just other people, but other inhabitants of the school field. For example, the little owl. How did the little owl feel about it? Where should we site it so that it was well away from wildlife, from the trees, etc., as well as from the neighbours who might complain about it? So we took all these different perspectives and children researched and found out these different angles. When we develop agency, this is not something that necessarily happens as children get older. They can do it from very early years. So here we've got some reception children thinking about where they're going to site the bin for their food waste, and bringing geography into play by thinking about where is this place, what is it like, where are we going to site it? We don't want it in a place where it's too hot in case wasps come, or where people are sitting. So we can use a map and marking good and bad places, etc. And then we can check if the idea is a good one and see what everyone thinks. Here we've got some older children here. They've been looking at the problem of the effect on biodiversity of rapid climate change and the habitat loss. So we're investigating how that habitat's being destroyed. What can we actually do? How can we build some owl boxes perhaps? And where should we site it? So just getting children to work through that process again of getting that knowledge, thinking about perspectives they need to understand the problem, and actually taking action. So we've got geography in a coherent curriculum. Then we can look at the national curriculum for geography and we can find a lot in it. We can talk about weather and rainfall. We can get that vocabulary of weather and climate. We can build that into agency of reducing energy use and understanding the different kinds of energy and why different kinds of energy are found in different places, why solar energy is better in sunnier places, why some places might be better for hydroelectric power, etc. We can look at those distribution of energy by understanding the geometry framework of the world, and we can investigate issues such as climate change and deforestation. We can also challenge misconceptions as well. For example, if we're doing food and where does the food in our lunchbox come from, then perhaps we can think about, well, are food miles really that important? Let's challenge some of that thinking. Let's look at the actual facts and figures and actually how much of that food is transported by air these days. And Our World in Data is a great website for investigating these kind of facts and figures and just challenging some of the assumptions that we make about the world. So what can primary geography do? Here's a diagram from Owens, Rawlinson, William Witt, to just highlight some of the key aspects of primary geography and how it can enable thinking in all different kinds of ways. It can enable that naturally curious aspect. It can empower children to be spatially aware of where and why things are happening, to realise they're globally connected. It can also allow them to feel deeply concerned and critically engaged as well, and put all of those things together and link up with other aspects of the curriculum. If we just look at Key Stage 1 opportunities in geography, for example, and if people say to you, oh, there's no climate change in the national curriculum for geography, actually there is loads of climate change opportunities, because we need to have that basic knowledge. First of all, we need to have that knowledge of weather and climate. We need to be able to map seasonal change, think about connecting the human and the physical aspects, and get children to realise that there is that connection and think like a geographer. If we look more widely, we just link it in with the science in a coherent curriculum, then we can see that we can build on understanding what the weather is like and how it affects our everyday lives, to thinking by the end of year 6, well, what happens when the environment changes faster than an animal can adapt? Where and why are some places changing faster than others, and what can we do about it? So there's lots in there if we choose to look and find it and think about the contexts that we can put it in. But also not just thinking about the global, the local context, but thinking about global context as well. So as well as thinking about how we can reduce energy usage in our own school, thinking about positive energy stories from around the world. And I've just put some links here. There'll be a PDF available to some films from Ashton, where we can find out, for example, some positive action being taken in cities in Colombia, about solar pumps in Kenya, and about how people are coping, perhaps even more so after the recent earthquake again in Haiti. So when you're putting your curriculum together, perhaps you can think about what is the vision that drives your curriculum. There's never been a better time, because we now have the Ofsted framework with the 3 I's, to really use that as a focus. And why not have climate change as the focus to put your curriculum together and use that as a vision to drive everything that you do? I'm just going to finish quickly by saying that there will be some useful resources with links, particularly the Let's Go Zero campaign, lots of other links there. If you haven't seen it, this Earthrise poem from Amanda Gorman is absolutely brilliant to use with your class, and some prompts for putting your curriculum together. And I'm going to finish there. Thank you.
Paula, thank you very much indeed. That was a lovely way to end the session. Thanks very much to those of you who've been with us through the session. Well over 100 people joining us. Plenty of links for different age groups, different ideas for literacy, for narratives. Kit wanted me to mention also thinking about curriculum mapping for safeguarding, and the resources that all of the presenters have created will be on Living Geography blog, and Kit also has a blog, and other presenters also, I'm sure, will be sharing that via social media as well. Thank you to those who've been adding tweets. Thanks to Karen for sort of setting it up in the first place, really, and all of the work that all of the GA members and volunteers do. Thank you to you for sticking with us. Thanks particularly to Radhika, to Michaela, to Kit, to Sue, and to Paula for presenting tonight. I've just nearly got locked in, so I think it's perhaps time for me to go home. Have a lovely evening, everybody. And if you do want to get in touch via social media, please do. Otherwise, COP26 coming up. Let's make sure we make the most of it within our geography classrooms and curriculum, so that this guy, wrong side, that guy, feels proud of us. Have a lovely evening. Thank you very much.